stories that I remember growing up, because we used to fish a lot down there, but usually from the shoreline, yeah, no deep sea fishing, because we were told not to yet because it's not a place to go. Yeah, and so we used to do a lot of the shoreline fishing from there. One story I remember was my grandmother, because my grandmother on my father's side, my father's mother is from Chokaha, yeah, Kahaolopua. And so Lucille Kahaolopua, she used to be ono for puhi, for Aipuhi Oya. And so that was one place that she used to, before all those rocks right there, right at the entrance area, it was so sandy. And I remember going with her, and she would actually make a nice pond on the sand, and then make a little waterway to the ocean. And as the waves come up, she knows that, this is the time. It was always at nighttime. So she would put the lamaku at the where the pond was, and she would throw a piece of meat inside. And all she would do is just kind of crouch down, and she just waits until all of the puhis come inside. And then when puhis were going in the pond, she would just cover up the waterway back to the ocean, and she would just be clubbering those puhis left and right. But she was one, none of us eat puhi at this time. But for her, she will always puhi. She always loved the puhi. Yeah. But we were always told that area was kapu, yeah. And then just because of what it is, yeah, the Liliivi, the whole movement from this realm to the next realm. Yeah, and so it was actually my tutu Lucille Kaolopua that always said we don't go fishing, deep sea fishing on that side. And there have been, you guys know how many people have passed on when they're fishing down the Liliivi. It was actually Tutu Lucille Kaolopua that shared the story of the three wives of Liliivi. And it kind of stuck with me. And so the chant that I wrote back in 1990 something that talked about Lehia, Keoni Pupu, and Laie Kabaya speaks of the three Vahinis that Liliivi had at that time. And then when Liliivi passed away, those three wives kind of turned into those ponds there in the back. I have never been there since 1980s, 1990s. I have not been back there, but it's still there. Yeah, I guess you still got to crawl. And that's Luana. Luana Busby also always used to go down there. She used to always just relax in those ponds. Yeah. When I got my dissertation, I was fortunate to sit with Auntie Luella Aina and Uncle Donald Pakele. Yeah, and of course, Auntie Luella she just came out of surgery. Uncle Donald Pakele passed away. But my dissertation was focused on just the Ike Kupuna of that area of Chokahaya. And that, I'm not sure if you did know, but Uncle Donald Pakele's grandfather, his house was actually in Papai. And he always used to say, so when he got his stroke, 1994, 1996, it was a while ago when he had his stroke. But his only serenity that he could find, because that's when he left Hawaiian Homeland. So Uncle Ed Kanahele was the head of Hawaiian Homeland. And then when he left, Uncle Donald Pakele took over until he had his stroke, and then he couldn't do that anymore. I'm not too sure if he couldn't or that he didn't want to, or maybe people didn't want him, I don't know. But he decided to leave. And that's when Papai came, yeah, because Papai, I'm not sure if the water moles still own that. Do they still own that area?
To our belief,
Yeah, we need to get it back from them.
Polole.
But they don't live here. But it was actually an agreement between Uncle Donald and the Watermole people that allowed him to go to do what he did back in the 2000s, early 2000s. And you knew that he had a program. You probably were part of, did you guys know that he had a program down there with Keiki?
I remember Mom taking Keiki on excursion from Kaumeke. So we've gone on a few with her, with him.
So there were a lot of alternative educational centers that allowed their children, some from Hilo High, some from Waikia, that allowed Uncle Don to take the kids down to Papai. And that's all they did was work down there. For years, they did that. And then I'm not too sure if they had a falling out or whatever, but then Uncle Donald he was very heartbroken when he could no longer, I mean, we all can go down there, but he was very heartbroken when he was no longer part of that. But he always speaks about that area, yeah, in terms of the serenity. Of course, it's hard, yeah. You can, when I remember talking to him, this was back in 2008. Something so beautiful should not have easy access to. Yeah, and I think that's one thing that he and I talked about all the time. He's the one that took me down to Papai. And they said, wow, kind of rough at this road. And I remember he said, something so beautiful should not have easy access to. He talked about the caves where some of the things were that he found while he was there. Still unbeknownst to me where those caves are, but I think he sealed them out. But it's just his genealogical, historical connection. I just have so many memories of just his 9 kupuna that I interviewed. It was actually 10, but at that time, my Uncle Manny was not doing well, so I decided not to ho'olaha his ola. And he's still alive, 90 years old, he's still alive. But everybody else, they're still, and Etimaile passed away, Uncle Don passed away, but everybody else is still around. But for that area, Uncle Donald was one of the key people that, and because he was from there, and he always said he never pretended he came from Keaukaha. He always knew that he came from that part of the moku, yeah. And so even though much of his work was from Keaukaha, he knew his connection was to Papai. And he protected that as much as he could. The other person who I remember, now I'm not too sure how much you folks found out about Pu'umaile.
Only that it was named after the pu'u, a cinder cone. I always thought it was named after, mounds like Kanui or Namaile, but, I was corrected by Auntie Pua. And that Haukapila was there and that high surf knocked it down.
Yeah. And so when they moved that, it was actually a TB clinic, yeah, a TB hospital, TB, whatever you call that hospital. So tuberculosis people, and of course they didn't have that, it's kind of like COVID now. Yeah, we don't have those ongoing vaccines that'll save us from the world. But TB was one of those kinds of diseases. So they had to isolate those people, kids, many of them were kids at Pu'umaile. And then when it got passed down, and of course they moved it up to where it is down at up Waikea, up Kaumana side, they kept the name Pu'umaile. They still kept the name Pu'umaile. It was the name of the hospital, not necessarily the place. Auntie Luella Aina spoke about when her brother is going to come to me, Uncle Robert. So when Uncle Robert was young, elementary age, he was actually put in that hospital. One thing that she remembers, she does not have fond memories of Pu'umaile because it was all very sad to her. Because Uncle Robert, because of his illness, he was placed in the hospital and nobody could have access to those people inside there. And all she remembers was sitting where the breakwater was, the wall is, the wall by Lehua side, and just kind of seeing her brother up in the hospital room and just waving. But it did isolate a lot of our Hawaiians from other families and their own families. And just because of what Pu'umaile was supposed to be, it was basically a hospital for people that were ill and could not necessarily have a quick vaccine for. Uncle Robert eventually got out, but it was actually months and months later. Yeah. But you can imagine the number of families who had people inside there and just kind of separated from them. Those are the ones that I remember the most, especially from Auntie Luella and Uncle Don. No other kupuna I talked to mentioned about that area. Yeah, and because again, according to my grandmother, that was not an area you frequent often. Yeah. And also because it was known as the Aina for that Ali. Yeah. And so it's kind of, there's an undocumented couple, that people place upon that area. But those are the major pieces. My father used to do a lot of Opihi and Ha'uke'uke down there. And I remember spending our time down there when we were small and just going and then Opihi and Ha'uke'uke. But those are some of the pieces that I remember. You know, just, so right by Richardson. So here's another one. My father always tells me about the story when they were small, when they were like elementary, intermediate age. And right outside Pua Kahinano. So Pua Kahinano is where Richardson's is, yeah, but more towards cliffs. My grandmother, Lucille Kaulapua, she used to go diving for limu, yeah. And so right beyond that cliff, there used to be a lot of laupapa with limu kohu just growing. By the way, which one did the limu, when you guys were in high school, did the limu? I just found that paper. I still have that paper. I just found it. And it's like, gee, you guys had something going back then. So anyway, so my grandmother used to dive, yeah. And of course, back then you cut, you don't hooky, you cut. And that current was so strong, yeah. And so even her, even though she's not from Ka'u, she knows that current. She knew that current is Hala'ea current, yeah. But eventually she got pushed so far out that she got stuck. There's two ways the Hala'ea current will push, yeah. At a point that it'll push you towards Hilo Bay, and there's a point that it'll push you all the way down to Ka'u. She got caught in the one that pushed you to Hilo Bay. But of course, my father guys, being young as they were, and the Hala'ea going down to Ka'u, of course, you got to pass the Levi. That's why many people die, yeah, past that, because they don't make it past that point. But for her, she got into the front current that actually took her to Hilo Bay. But my father guys didn't know. And so my father guys were crying because, you know, they saw their mother being washed out to ocean. Of course, anybody would be. And this is my father, and he passed away in 1994, yeah, my daddy. And I remember that story because they were like there, and then family members came, people were kind of in the ocean trying to find my grandmother's body. And then at the end of that day, it was right before it started to get dark. My grandmother rushes through the bushes and says, okay, it's time to go home now. And so she always says, when the current takes you, let it take you. It'll eventually bring you back. So she actually got onto Hilo Bay, and she actually started walking back to Kyoka, and then people picked her up and took her back to Kyoka, and that's where the whole piece is. So it's right on the cusp of Lehia and Port Kahinano, yeah, that area where that current can actually take you one way or the other, yeah. And so those are the things that I remember the most. I haven't spoken about these things for years as well, because nobody asked me. No, but I'm glad, you know, because, you know, my memory is not as good as before. I remember kids' faces, but I don't remember all the stuff. Yeah, so yeah. Yeah, any other questions that you might have? But those are the ones that come to me. And I'll share with you my dissertation, because in the dissertation, it has stories of those 9 kupuna. And again, I removed my Uncle Benny's one because of where he was at that time. But it'll kind of give you the whole Kyokaha perspective. Yeah. So when you enter where the Malani guys owned, the Malani owned the Vernas, the way they owned that land all the way into Papua East side. Yeah. But it was all connected. Yeah, that whole area.
Oh yeah, mahalo nui. I was just going to ask to read that dissertation.
And it was never for me. I kind of gave you the raw material because I have over 1,000 pages of the interviews. And so only families. So when Auntie Miley died, Aloha, Auntie Aloha. So Aloha asked me, you know, Kumu, can I get a copy of my mom's dissertation? The raw notes of her story. And I think hers was like about 250 pages. So I made copies of that and gave it to Aloha. Uncle Donald, yeah, was another one. When he passed away, the daughter-in-law, because Kalana passed away already, the daughter-in-law asked, you know, for that. Of course, I don't give. I told Vina I was going to send you the Oli, the one I did 1996 on Kyokaha that goes all the way up to Keonepupu side, the Hia side. And then I'll send the the final dissertation piece that you can look through. And there's more snippets in there on that area inside there. But I think you're right. I know when you talked about the kind of place that it was, you go in and you get out. There's not a place to linger. I don't even remember camping there. And we used to camp a lot in Chokaha, but we never used to camp in that area. We'll just go in and go out. You come across stories of how people used to fish. And then again, those ponds were always so prevalent along the coast, even into Lehua. And so as they're caught and they put them in the bag, they put them in the pond, and they went from place to place to place, and then they go back, pick up all the bags of fishes that they caught. So they never used to catch the fish and walk those miles around. They would just wrap it up, put it in a pond, and then later on go pick up their stuff. So you'll see that in the dissertation piece. Our kupuna was smart. Yeah. And and just because we're in this century and this time and space does not mean our Ike kupuna should be forgotten. Yeah. There were a lot of intelligent pieces. Yeah, but I'll send that to you folks.
Okay, man. I remember my dad sharing that story about Grandpa Ioane. That's how they would holo too. They would leave it in the taipus or in the pools, and then on their way back, pick it up.
Yeah. Uncle Donald mentioned about his wife just dropping him off wherever he wanted to. And then at the end of the day, the first thing in the morning, then before it comes dark, meet someplace and go back to all the different pools and pick up all the bags of fishes or whatever they used to catch.
Okay, mahalo nui. This is some really good, ike. I was telling Anna Kema, sometimes you feel junky, even like 7 years ago would have been a better time to start because of a whole bunch of the kupuna that lived in Kings Landing while we were growing up, passed within that time frame. So, but now is my cut too.
This is the time that to ask. I went to see Auntie Noy. Auntie Noy is 95 years old, yeah. But every Christmas I go to sit with her. That lady has a lot. So inside you'll see her story in that she was one of the 9 kupunas I interviewed. Yeah, and Auntie Toyland was still alive at that time. So you hear her voice on the tapes and things like that. And I have tapes too. Yeah, I'm not too sure if the tapes it's all audible, but if you ever need those things, let me know.
Okay, mahalo nui ke ia hui ana.
Kahuna va ya o lua I kaumomia, and then ohana e riki ko lua make.
Okay, mahalo nui.
Ko aloha ya o lua no ka pono o ko papa me ka pono ka ohana no hoi.
Mahalo.
Ahuiho kako.
Ahuiho.
Ahuiho.
Ahuiho no.